I'd like to welcome you all to this lecture from learning to earning. We can go back to the previous slide, please. I'll tell you when to put it. Yeah. Why India must 100x its investment in schools by Professor Jishnu. We at Indus Action are proud to host this event along with our co-hosts in this endeavor, the Center for Civil Society and the Center Square Foundation, who are also here. Just very quickly, for those of you who don't know us, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about doing this action, please. Can I get the next slide, please? Yeah, so our work is on trying to enable social protection amongst the population in India. We work with governments and with civil society and with cities to ensure that the entitlements, the welfare entitlements that are due to people actually reach them or reach them on time. We work across several what we call moments that matter, that are critical stages in families or a household's life cycle where welfare entitlements are required to sort of not get into poverty cycles and traps. One of those important moments is education. There are some negative moments like death and unemployment, but there are also these positive moments like education where a lot of support is required. And so one of those things that we've been doing is enabling the implementation of the Right to Education Act. We have impacted over 800,000 children through that, through our work for the last 12 years. We are now working on labor and livelihoods, where we look at construction workers and unorganized workers, welfare entitlements, and also the access to public services. So over the last 12 years, about 2.2 million Indian citizens have been sort of touched by work. Next slide, please. This is just the range of the work that we do. We're working across India with the state governments, a variety of state governments, over 18 of them, and the central government as well, with the Ministry of Labour. And with that, I'm not going to tell you anything more about Indus Action because this is not the day for that. There is more material on your chair that you want to look at that. Let me just get into why we're doing this event. Right? Next slide, please. Yeah. So, I think there are just a few stats that might be useful. From the last UDICE survey, the 24-25 survey, we now know that there are 1.2 million teacher vacancies across elementary schools in India at this point. Right? There are single teacher schools serving over 1.8 lakh children. We found from the Asar survey of 2024 that over 45% of primary school teachers are untrained in foundational pedagogy, which is resulting in rote learning and versus comprehension. And also that there's a big digital divide, right? Only 28% of government primary schools are functional computers, and of course, rural smartphone access remains limited. So what does this lead to? This leads to what has now been found as an alarming learning crisis. It's been there for a while. The other report from last year shows that 25 to 30%, that's just the number of students in class 5 who can read a class 2 text and do division. So we are at a point where our learning levels are very, very poor. And what is this leading to? This is leading to a preference among parents of private schools. There has been a sort of big shift from the public school system to the private school system in recent years. And I think at the core of it all is the idea that parents are rejecting poor quality, right? They want to, should we be fixing public schools? What should we be doing in terms of investment in schools? That's really the focus of this lecture. Great. More people are coming in, so I'm glad I'm doing this. Now, today's program is simple. Once I'm done introducing Jishnu, he will present the work that he's been doing for the last 15 years on trying to understand the labor market outcomes of good quality education. This will be followed by a Q&A, and then what we are hoping is just an open discussion. Typically, when we hold these kinds of events, it's mostly the policy researchers like myself who are in the room. Today, we've been lucky to have a wider audience to come in. We invited school leaders. There are some school students sitting right in front of me. And so we hopefully have a conversation that goes in multiple directions as we kind of talk about what it takes to actually produce good quality schooling. Finally, I'd just like to introduce Jishnu. Jishnu Das is a distinguished professor of public policy at the Lefort School of Public Policy and the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Jishnu's work focuses on health and education in low and middle income countries. He has co-developed the largest and longest running cohort studies on learning outcomes in low income countries and has led an agenda on the quality of healthcare in low income countries. His research led to the widespread adoption of a training program for informal workers in West Bengal, health facility inspections in Kenya, networks for private sector providers in India, and the scale-up of quality measurement tools in health globally, and the development of financial products for private schools. He is also part of the team that developed India's federal inpatient health insurance scheme, the RSGY, which have reached 150 million people. Jishnu helped write the World Development Report on Gender and Development in 2012 and 2015. He was a Flanders visiting professor at McGill University. He has received many awards. I will not go through all the awards because it's just a very long list. But just to say, he was a member of the Lancet Commission on COVID-19 in India and a member of the State of West Bengal Global Advisory Board for COVID-19. He currently serves on the board of JPAL and as an advisor to the Indus network. He holds degrees in economics from St. Stephen's, Cambridge, and Harvard University. With that, Jishnu, I'd like to call you on the stage. And I think the room is pretty full. So if people come in, we hope they come in quietly.
And to Manki from Indus and from all the people from CFF for organizing this talk, and I hope a very interesting session after that. So I won't waste your time. आजकल मैं वाशिंगटन डीसी में रहता हूँ और वाशिंगटन डीसी से मैं आपको एक कहानी बताता हूँ. वेरी सिंपल कहानी. एक आदमी हर रोज सुबह वो उठ के ही goes to give the coffee. वो कॉफी चाय पी के he goes to the neighborhood kiosk जहाँ से अखबार खरीद के he goes to his work. He goes to his work. वो हर रोज काम पे जाते हैं और एक दिन बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो जाती है because his boss says you're doing a great job, can I take you out for lunch? ये क्यों प्रॉब्लम खड़ी हो जाती है उसके लिए? क्योंकि उसको पढ़ना या लिखना नहीं आता. अब इन दिनों में उसी टाइम पे एक मेनू निकली थी. एक जगह हार्वर्ड जॉनसन करके एक जगह है जहाँ पर वो तस्वीर लगाते थे कि खाना क्या है मेनू में, और उसमें वो बच जाता है. लेकिन ये जो किस्सा मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ ये एक जॉनथन फोजल की किताब है, इलिटरेट अमेरिका. और आप लोग मानेंगे नहीं लेकिन 25% लोग जो एडल्ट्स हैं अमेरिका में इस वक्त उनको पढ़ना या लिखना नहीं आता. अगर आप किसी भी रेस्टोरेंट में जाएंगे तो 4 में से 1 आदमी, 1 औरत वो मेनू नहीं पढ़ सकते. और आप ये सोच सकते हैं कि शायद ये सिर्फ अमेरिका में प्रॉब्लम है और कहीं नहीं है. लेकिन एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, PAC करके उनका नाम है, और उन्होंने बहुत देशों में ऐसे उन्होंने सर्वेस की हैं एडल्ट्स की, कि आपकी लिटरेसी कितनी है. और अगर आप उसको देखेंगे ये आपको नजर नहीं आएगा और वहाँ से दूर है. लेकिन अगले स्लाइड में अगर आप देखेंगे तो अगर आप OECD कंट्रीज में देखेंगे 35% of people are what we call PAC level 1 and 2. जो PAC level 1, what is PAC level 1? अगर आपको डॉक्टर एक प्रेस्क्रिप्शन देते हैं, राइट, कि आप हर सुबह 1 गोली लेना, खाने में लेना, राइट. मुझे कब गोली लेनी पड़ती थी? सुबह. और कितनी गोली? करेक्ट, 1, राइट. ये सवाल तकरीबन 10% लोग आंसर नहीं कर सकते, एडल्ट्स. राइट. तो उनको डॉक्टर से प्रिस्क्रिप्शन मिलती है, उनको कुछ समझ नहीं आती कि इसमें क्या लिखा हुआ है. इसी किसी भी फॉर्म पे डेट ऑफ बर्थ लिखना उनको नहीं आता. राइट. डेट ऑफ बर्थ आपका 2015 मंथ 4th में. 15 नवंबर. आपकी अभी बर्थडे हुई थी. कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशन. 11th में. 2010 it published. Taking the right place. और लेवल 2 के जो लोग हैं, राइट, लेवल 2 के जो लोग हैं, उनको ये, अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं, अच्छा इंग्लिश,
The library was closed to July 3rd at 5 p.m. for Independence Day. How?
लाइब्रेरी कितने बजे बंद होगी?
5 p.m.
और किस दिन पे?
July 3rd.
तकरीबन 20% लोग जो एडल्ट्स हैं अमेरिका में उस क्वेश्चन को नहीं आंसर कर सकते। अब आप ये सोचिए, थैंक यू सो मच। और अगर आप ये सोचेंगे कि देखें, ये जो प्रॉब्लम जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, क्या हमने एक ऐसे माहौल हमने बनाई है, ऐसी जिंदगी बनाई है लोगों के लिए, ऐसे जगह में हम रहते हैं जहाँ पर हम एज्यूम करते हैं कि हर जो आदमी है, औरत है, जो काम करते हैं, वो पढ़ना और लिखना उनके लिए ज़रूरी है, राइट। और मैं यहाँ से मैं आपको बहुत दूर ले जाऊँगा, मैं आपको ले जाऊँगा पाकिस्तान, राइट। पाकिस्तान में 20 साल मैं काम कर चुका हूँ। हाँ जी, इंडिगो से ले जाना आपसे नामुमकिन है, लेकिन मैं जहनी बात से आपको ले जाऊंगा, आपकी इमेजिनेशन में आपको ले जाऊंगा। और पाकिस्तान में हमने 3rd ग्रेड के बच्चों को हमने ली थी 2003 में, राइट, 2003, एंड 74%, अगर आप ये नंबर वहां से पढ़ना बहुत मुश्किल है, मैं आपके लिए पढ़ देता हूँ। ये पहला जो क्वेश्चन है वो उर्दू में ये पूछता है कि केला का हमने पिक्चर दिया, राइट, एंड वहां लिखते हैं हम कि इस पिक्चर को आप मैच करो वर्ड से। सो अबाउट 74%, यानी कि 74% लोग करेक्टली वो आंसर, बच्चे करेक्टली आंसर कर सकते हैं, राइट। लेकिन मैं अगर उनसे एक मुश्किल सा सवाल पूछूं उनके लिए कि 678 प्लस 923, 678 plus 923, हाँ, ये देखिए, ये वाशिंगटन से आया, कभी मुश्किल है इनके लिए बोलना, लेकिन तकरीबन अगर मैं पेपर पेन आपको दे दूँ वो कर लेंगे आप, तकरीबन 55% बच्चे उनको आंसर कर सकते हैं, राइट। लेकिन अगर मैं आपसे ये पूछूं कि फ्रैक्शन 7/3 आप उसको कैसे सिंप्लीफाई कर सकते हैं, राइट, आप मुझे बताएंगे कि वो तो 2/3 है, राइट। लेकिन जिन बच्चों की हमने इम्तिहान ली है वो सिर्फ 3% बच्चे उस आंसर को, उस क्वेश्चन को आंसर कर सकते हैं, राइट। एंड इफ वी आस्क, कैन यू मेक अ सेंटेंस विद द वर्ड डीप, the water is deep, that question is about 1%. Next slide. अब इन्हीं बच्चों को, right, for 15 years, right, we followed these children. 5,000 बच्चों को 1,112 गांव में हर साल उनके पीछे हम जाते थे, right? तंग आ चुके हैं हमसे, जो जाहिर है, लेकिन हर साल उनके साथ हमने काम किया, right? Now they're about 22, 23, 24, right? And as 24-year-old children, adults, young adults, right? These are not children anymore. What is it that they can do? Well, they can do, at 24, the best top 20% can do all of this. They can match a word, they can construct a sentence, they can solve fraction. लेकिन मुझे फिक्र होती है that these bottom 40%, they can't answer any of these questions. Right? Even very basic reading, writing for the bottom 40% at the age of 24, it's not feasible. Right? और आप ये पूछ सकते हैं कि how does this affect their daily lives? और अगर आप next slide देखेंगे, right? यहाँ पर हम उनसे पूछ रहे हैं कि देखें आप लोगों ने इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बिल जरूर देखा होगा, राइट? द इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बिल इज द मोस्ट कॉम्प्लिकेटेड थिंग दैट यू कैन इमेजिन इन योर डेली लाइफ, राइट? So we have a question that says the meter reading is 2500 kilovolts. वो first 500 units आपकी charge होगी 10 रुपए पे, और more than 500 will be charged at ₹20. Late fee will be 500 रुपए. आपकी पूरी electricity bill क्या है, right? And like all of us, it comes June and the electricity bill is 32,000 and we're like, ये कहाँ से हो गया भाई? What the hell? What's going on? फिर लड़ाई करो, ये करो, वो करो. Very few people can answer, can actually think of that question. I'll tell you how many. Then we ask another question. कि सेल फोन पे आपका टेक्स्ट है, राइट? टेक्स्ट में लिखा हुआ है, यार मेरे गांव से बाहर रुका हुआ हूँ और मेरी मोटरसाइकिल खराब हो गई है, क्या मुझे लेने आ सकता है कोई, राइट? एंड फाइनली हम ये पूछते हैं कि आप बाजार में गए, आलू आपने 2 पाव आलू खरीदे, 1 किलो प्याज की इतनी प्राइस ये है, यहाँ आलू पता नहीं, आलू आपको कितने किलो? हाँ, 40 रुपीज के, 40 रुपीज. मैं आधा बंगाली हूँ, आधा पंजाबी, तो बंगाली साइड ऑलवेज गो शॉपिंग. हाँ,
पाकिस्तान को ले जाते हैं.
पाकिस्तान ये भी है, पाकिस्तान पे काम किया है ना मैंने 20 साल से. So these questions, अगर आप देखेंगे, these are daily life skills, right? इन skills के बिना we cannot survive in today's world, right? But these skills, if you look at, जो bottom 40% है, वो एक भी question, एक भी सवाल वो नहीं आंसर कर, right? Electricity bill पढ़ना, text पढ़ना हमारे फोन पे. So why have we all moved to WhatsApp voice messages? Because nobody can read what we are saying, right? So the problem really is, or electricity bill to thodi de. Electricity bill only the top 20% can understand, right? 80% of the population can't understand an electricity bill, right? So this problem that we are talking about, ki aapki foundational, this is why it's foundational, right? ये बुनियादी है, इसके बिना आप आगे नहीं बढ़ सकते, right? ये जो बुनियादी जो skills हैं कि आप पढ़ सकते हैं, लिख सकते हैं और बेसिक गणित आप कर सकते हैं नहीं, this is what I'm going to talk about. और next slide please. Problem ये है, right? The problem is this, कि अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं, and from 20 years, for 20 years we've been saying कि देखें foundational learning और numeracy में बहुत problems हैं, we need to focus on this, and for 20 years we've been getting the same answer, right? Which is, there are 5 big problems with why solving foundational learning and numeracy is a problem, right? पहले वो कहेंगे कि देखें, there's something called fade out, यानी कि I worked with you in grade 2 in kindergarten, right? In class 1, class 2, class 3, मैं आपके साथ कर रहा हूँ काम, I raise your ability to read, लेकिन class 6, class 7 में जाके क्या होगा, right? वो जो मैं हमने काम किया है, बुनियादी जो काम किया है, वो क्या बुनियादी रहेगी या वापस चले जाएगी, right? That's called fade out, right? और हर स्टडी में ये दिखाया जाता है कि जब हम फाउंडेशन लर्निंग थोड़ा बहुत बढ़ाते हैं, 2 साल बाद वो वापस चले जाते हैं उसी के. सेकेंड बिग प्रॉब्लम इज, लुक, जब मैं सेक्रेटरी से बात करता हूँ, कहता हूँ कि यू शुड फोकस ऑन फाउंडेशनल लर्निंग, वो मुझे कहते हैं कि आप मुझे आके बताते हैं कि 5 साल के बच्चे के साथ क्या करें, राइट? मेरे कमरे के बाहर देखो कितने लोग हैं जो स्कूल कर चुके हैं, कॉलेज कर चुके हैं, उनके पास नौकरी नहीं है, राइट? So what are we going to do by raising foundational learning? Later on, these kids will go to college and they won't find a job, right? So that's this idea that even if we raise foundational learning, we are not going to change people's lives because there are so many other constraints that are coming in. Right? Then number 3 is, Rahul, अगर मैं आपको 100 रुपए अगर आप स्टॉक्स में डालें, 5% इंटरेस्ट रेट, प्रोविडेंट फंड, 15 साल में कितने देंगे? 200, right? So the problem is this, कि गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से, सरकार की तरफ से, किसी भी पेरेंट्स की तरफ से, जब आप सोच रहे हैं कि प्राइवेट स्कूल में अगर मैं अपने बच्चे को भेज दूँ, आप किसी ना किसी तरह में आप फ्यूचर में इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रहे हैं, बट लेकिन फ्यूचर की जो इन्वेस्टमेंट आप कर रहे हैं वो आज नहीं मिलने वाला, वो 15 साल बाद मिलेगा, राइट? सो यू हैव टू थिंक अबाउट, well, I'm making this investment now, I'm going to get the returns 15 years later, right? For every $1, every 1 rupee you spend, you need to get 2 rupees back later. Are we sure that we are going to get that size of returns? Right? Number 4 and number 5 is hard because अगर आप मुझसे पूछें कि ठीक है, आप मुझे दिखा सकते हैं कि अगर आप बच्चों को पूरा लिखना पढ़ाना आप कर सकते हैं तो फिर शायद उनके लिए बेहतरी होगी. But the bottom line is all our interventions, all the things we have tried, हम बच्चे को यहाँ से यहाँ तक नहीं ले जा सकते हैं, बच्चे को यहाँ से यहाँ तक ले जाते हैं. And then the question that arises, अगर आप बच्चे को यहाँ से यहाँ तक नहीं ले जा सकते, राइट, यहाँ से यहाँ तक, लेकिन माहौल ऐसी है, घर पे सिचुएशन ऐसी है कि यहाँ से यहाँ ले जाना बहुत मुश्किल है, तो फिर उन्नति होगी या नहीं, बेहतरी होगी या नहीं. And the last one, look, a lot of you are educators and you all know, if we start focusing only on one thing, and we say we're going to focus only on Urdu, only on math, only on Hindi, only on whatever, then वो whole child का क्या हो, right? Right? तो पाकिस्तान में बहुत फिक्र होती है कि इस्लामियात, right? इस्लामियात एक रहने का कोई एक रहने की तहजीब. How do you behave with others? How do you behave with everyone? ये सारी चीजें, I'm also a parent, हमारे लिए सबके लिए फिक्र होती है, right? Is the school the place to actually think about these things also? How do you inspire creativity? How do you do holistic things, right? And these are all really, really important questions that we don't have the answers to. Right? Next slide. So what we did was we started working in 2003 in the province of Punjab. And Punjab, Pakistan is just across the border. वो अमृतसर से अगर आप वाघा बॉर्डर तक जाएंगे, वहाँ से वाघा बॉर्डर से लाहौर 20 किलोमीटर है. मेरी माँ पैदाइशी लाहौर के हैं, मेरे फादर बंगाल के हैं, मेरे 3 भाई हैं. हम कहते हैं कि 2 भाई तो ठीक ही निकले, और मुझे वो कहते हैं कि वो पंजाबी ब्रेन मिल गई और बंगाली ब्रॉन मिल गई, तो मेरे ख्याल से हंसते हैं. My brothers have got the Bengali brain and the Punjabi brawn. For me, the things have been reversed, so things are bad. So I went to Pakistan to do this work. And Punjab is the biggest province in Pakistan. It's about 80 million people. Right? हाँ जी, आप मुझे इंटेलिजेंस ना समझे, मेरे भाइयों को देखें. अगर इंटेलिजेंस होती तो पैसे भी होते मेरे पास. So it's a province that has about 13 million children in school. Right? Or अगर आप मतलब, it's not as big as UP, it's not as big, it's about 80 million people, and it has about 13 million children. It's about the 12th largest schooling system in the world, and from one more piece, it has about, it used to have very few private schools, लेकिन अब तकरीबन 47,000 private schools हैं पंजाब province. And rather than very low-cost private schools. Huh? So next slide. So this is what this has done. ये गांव है, फैसलाबाद इनका डिस्ट्रिक्ट है. पहले उसको दायलपुर कहते थे ब्रिटिश टाइम में, अब कहते हैं फैसलाबाद. अब ये एक गांव है, और इस गांव में तकरीबन देयर अबाउट 500 हाउसहोल्ड्स. एंड अगर मैं बच्चों के साथ वॉक करूं तो यहाँ से यहाँ तक पहुँचने में मुझे 15 मिनट लगता. अब इस गांव का अगर आप नक्शा देखें, इसमें इट्स नॉट एज इफ इट्स वन स्कूल, राइट? वो जो डॉलर साइन लगा रखा है, those are 5 private schools, right? And the government schools, there are 2 government schools. One government school is here and one government school is here. Okay? ज़्यादातर government schools are on the sides, on the edges of the village. क्यों? Land. right? Because when a government school is made in a village, the village has to give the land. और जब जमीन गांव दे रही है वो विलेज के सेंटर में गांव नहीं देते, right? The common land is called the Shamlas in Punjab, and there this is mostly given on the common land on the outside, right? So हर गांव में अब 7 वो दिन चले गए जहां पर ईच गांव में एक स्कूल होता था, वहां भेजे बच्चों को, right? Now the situation is really complicated. You have about 5 private schools, 2 public schools, 3 public schools, and you have to think about इतने सारे schools हैं हमारे, कौन से स्कूल में अपने बच्चे को भेजना है, right? Choice बहुत बढ़ चुका है, right? Now the interesting thing is if you look at all these schools, and that's the next slide. अच्छा, एक मिनट पिछले स्लाइड पे जाओगे आप प्लीज, सॉरी. अच्छा, एक चीज, these are all low-cost private schools, right? So when we started this work, everybody used to think कि private schools बहुत महंगे होते हैं. These are low-cost private schools. So इसमें तकरीबन how much is the fee in 2003-04? It's about 1,000 rupees for the year. So 100 रुपए, 120 रुपए per month, right? So मैं उस price point की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, right? Okay. Next slide. So here's the really interesting thing. This is one village. I took one village and I said, are all these schools the same? And they're not. Each of these schools is actually quite different, right? So if you look at this school has quite bad test scores. यहाँ बच्चों की test scores खराब है. Basic facilities कम है. PTR आप कैसे हैं? Student teacher ratio, STR, pupil teacher ratio, PTR ये है, you know, it's okay. But if you look at this private school, बच्चों की test scores थोड़ी बहुत ठीक है. Basic facilities बेहतर है. Student teacher ratio is very good. If you look at this school, it's very good on all of them. If you look at this private school, it's pretty bad on child test scores, but good on basic facilities, good on student teacher ratio. So the problem is, these are not schools that are all the same. Each school is different, right? And then when you talk to school owners, when you talk to people, वो कहते हैं कि parents को बहुत problem होती है, वो आके देखते हैं कि infrastructure कैसा है हमारा, right? So if you look at the next slide, we asked, sorry, let me just back up for a second. You can also ask कि in schools में how different are the test scores, right? उनकी foundational learning और numeracy में कितना फर्क करता है, right? So I'm going to show you a complicated picture, but let me just explain that picture to you. This is one village, right? This village की average है यहाँ, ठीक है? These are all the schools in the village. इसी गांव में there is one school जो सबसे बेहतर है. This is in the top 10% of all schools. But the same village has another school that is in the bottom 10% of all schools, right? So the variation मतलब the differences in test scores within the same village across many schools is very high, right? That was the simple picture. If we complicate it a bit, and this is the next slide, you can see this is all 112 villages, right? So each dot is a village, and how I have arranged this, I've arranged this that this is the worst village in our sample in terms of test scores. This is the best one. But the interesting thing is, in village after village, there's a huge difference between the best and the worst schools, right? How big is that difference? अगर मैं बच्चों को, right, worst school in the village में भेजूं, उनकी foundational learning and numeracy, उनकी आप कहते हैं निपुण score, right, will be about 5%, 10%. If I send them to the best school in the village, it will be about 80-85%. How big is that difference? 5%, 7% is Pakistan level averages. 80-85% is Sweden level averages. एक ही गांव में, उसी गांव में, the difference between the best and the worst school takes you all the way from Pakistan to Sweden, right? अब बहुत लड़ाई करते हैं, हमें लड़ाई करने की बहुत शौक होती है कि प्राइवेट स्कूल बेहतर है या पब्लिक स्कूल बेहतर है, राइट? ये एक सवाल लेके हम पता नहीं कितने सालों से लड़ाई करते हैं, राइट? बट हियर्स द रियलिटी. This is the next slide. ये तो मुझे भी पढ़ना नहीं आता. अच्छा. This is now what I've tried to do is I've tried to make the public schools are all in red and the private schools are all in black. Okay? So I wanted to first focus here. These are places with good public schools, and if you look at the top 10% of schools, they're just equally likely to be good public schools or private schools, right? So the best schools here in our sample can be either public or private. और अगर आप सोचेंगे कि इंडिया में केंद्रीय विद्यालय नवोदय इनकी सारी की performance is very very high, right? So the best schools can be public, they can be private, right? The interesting part with why the public sector does worse is because the really bad schools are all public, right? But the key point I want you to take away from this is it's not about public or private, it's about the school, right? You can have a good public school, a bad public school, a great private school, a bad private school. It's not about whether my child is going to a public school or a private school. It's really about, is my school good? Right? Next slide. So, लोग पूछते हैं कि भाई, इतने schools हैं, ये हो रहा है, वो हो रहा है. What are parents deciding on? तो हमने we asked them a simple question. We said, तीन तरह की schools आप जिक्र करें. Imagine with three types of schools. One school has very good infrastructure, right? But the teachers are not very good, and there's no textbooks or notebooks, right? Second school has very bad infrastructure, very bad teachers, but very good textbooks. And the third kind of school has very bad infrastructure, but very good teachers, but very bad textbooks. Tell us which school you think is good, right? And exactly as you or I would think, all the parents chose the school with the good teachers, right? They said, for us, infrastructure is not that important. Textbooks हो नहीं हो, अगर textbook नहीं है, हम खरीद लेंगे, right? But teachers हम नहीं खरीद सकते, right? You can't buy a good teacher, you can buy a good textbook, right? And that's what this is saying, right? It's always the schools with the best teachers that people are reporting to be good or very good, right? So then you can say, अच्छा ये तो लोग तो कह रहे हैं, कुछ तो लोग कहेंगे, लोगों का काम है कहना, अब आगे यहाँ से कैसे चले, right? Can we actually find some data points? And the way we look at it as economists, we say, look, one way to see what people value, and we can do this because these are private schools, is to see what they're willing to pay for. Right? So if you look at the next slide, what I've tried to do here is show you that if your private school is better, आपकी fees भी ज़्यादा है. And that's not a surprise to any of you. Right? It's not a surprise to people who work in the low-cost private sector. It's not a surprise to parents. Vasant Valley is going to be more expensive than Jishnu Das's school on the corner. Right? There's just absolutely no doubt. But this is what is interesting here is we are not doing Vasant Valley DTS with a low-cost. We are actually saying among 5 low-cost private schools, even there, right, if you're better or worse, the fees change. And the fees change by a lot. They change by 1,000 rupees. So double your fees if you become much better. Right? That you can't see. So we start seeing that parents really value the test scores that are coming out of school. They really value foundational learning and numeracy. Right? Next slide. So what I wanted to finish up with, what I wanted to take you now is we see in our sample, हमारे जो 5,000 बच्चे हैं हमारे 112 गांव में, we see कि चंद बच्चे जा रहे हैं बहुत ही अच्छे स्कूल में, right? और चंद बच्चे जा रहे हैं in schools that are not that good, right? And we wanted to see कि over time 15 साल बाद, 8 साल बाद, what happens to those children who have gone to a school that's not very good? And what happens to the children who have gone to schools that are very good? Right? अब आप ये सोचते हैं कि so what did we do? ये जो 5,000 बच्चे हैं, we followed them every year. Right? About मेरे 5,000 बच्चे थे, they were about 9 years old when we started following them. 15 साल बाद they're 24. Okay, and these were 112 villages. Let me just show you in the next slide. So their ages now, 15 years later, is now between the youngest is about 17, the oldest is about 31, 32, the average is about 24, right? Next slide. And this is a graph that I don't particularly like, but it's nice. You can see that grade 1, 2, 3, उनकी 100% attendance होती है, right? Then slowly grade 4 to 5 to 6 उनकी drop-offs होती है थोड़ी बहुत, right? Then again grade 8 to 9 उनकी थोड़ी बहुत drop-out होती है, right? And then interestingly, grade 9 onwards and college going, there are more women going than men. I don't know, are you seeing this here as well? That by the time you're reaching college, by the time you're graduating from high school, the women are more likely to be in than the men, and the men are dropping out more. That's what we are seeing in these data. Right? Next slide, please. So this is, अब ये लोग सब काम कर रहे हैं, right? The women are not working that much. Only about 8% of the women are working. What are the jobs that they're doing? Ideas? Teacher, nurse. One more. Thank you. Right? Those are the three main tasks, three main jobs that the women are doing. Right? Bridal makeup. अच्छा, what are the jobs? You know this also. हमारे 2000 men हैं हमारे सैंपल में जो अभी जॉब कर रहे हैं, राइट? वो 2000 में कितने लोगों को एक फॉर्मल सेक्टर जॉब नहीं है, जिसमें उनके पास कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है, परमानेंट जॉब है? 2000 में से कितने लोगों को मिली होगी? That's exactly right, about 50. Right? Only about 50 men have a formal sector job. And उस 50 में से 30 are in the army or police. Right? तो सबकी ड्रीम रहती है कि मुझे फॉर्मल सेक्टर जॉब आर्मी में मिल जाए. वो हर रोज लटकते हैं कि कहीं ना कहीं जब मेरे कद थोड़ी बढ़ जाए, वो कट ऑफ हो जाए. Right? So that's the reality, and we all know that. You know, if you look at India, you look at Pakistan, 95% of our jobs are in the informal sector. Right? So what are the biggest jobs that they are doing? वो किराने की दुकान चला रहे हैं, daily wage laborers, industrial worker, bicycle repair, factory worker. ये सारी छोटे काम कर रहे हैं. मोटरसाइकिल रिपेयर, वो काम कर रहे हैं. Cab driver, drivers, right? And the average earnings, these are what are called PPP terms, so it adjusts for differences in expenditures. Up socially, it's about 20,000 rupees a month. Right? That's what their average earnings are like. Next slide. So when we went back to them, so just to give you some idea, right? ये जो हमारे 5,700 बच्चे थे, they started off in 112 villages. We've gone back 15, 16 years later. Right? Out of 112 villages, how many villages do you think they have now spread out to? 760. Right? So about 57% of the women are in the same village, but 43% have been married everywhere. Right? How did we track them? We went to the original household. We said, "Unki ससुराल कहाँ पर है? Can you give us a phone number? Can we contact them?" Right? Wherever they told us, we went. Right? 2 साल लगे, 3 साल हमें लगे ट्रैक करने के लिए, right? Because among the men, about 10% had left the country And वो सारे 10%, one had gone to England, one had made it to Hong Kong. All of them were in the Gulf, right? And Gulf में problem ये होती है कि वो जाते ही, right? वो तब वो कंपनी वीजा पे जा रहे थे या उस पे जा रहे थे, जाते ही वो पासपोर्ट ले लेते हैं, छीन लेते हैं, और उनके पास कोई कम्युनिकेशन की मॉडल नहीं होती, right? So we would have to wait at home कि वो ईद के लिए वापस आए. Here you'd have to wait कि दिवाली, होली, छठ पूजा, ईद, इन चीज़ों के लिए वापस आए, तब उनको पकड़ेंगे, right? तो 2 साल हम इंतजार करते हैं, right? Waiting for these people to come back. So then, what we find, so this is how we did this tracking. So it took us about 2 years, 3 years to complete the tracking, right? And then in the next slide, I'll show you that the children who went to a better school, I'll have to read it because it's hard for you to see. The children who went to a better school in the same village, I'm not talking about different villages. 15 साल बाद उनकी जिंदगी में क्या क्या फर्क पड़ा है, right? So the children who went to a better school, they have almost 1 year more education today. ठीक है? Next slide. And you can do this for various things. So they have completed grade 8 by about 10% more. They have completed grade 10 by about 30% more. They have completed grade 12 by about 47% more. They have gone to college about 43% more. Right? So just going to a better school in your same villages pushes up your ability to go to college by about 43%. Right? अब आप सोच सकते हैं कि उनके तनख्वाह पे कोई फर्क पड़ा है या नहीं. Right? So this is this next slide. So we start, ये भी छोड़ दे आप, next slide. ये भी आप छोड़ दे. अच्छा, why do we see, so people start asking us कि भाई ये जो आप कह रहे हैं कि बेटर स्कूल जाने से वो कॉलेज ज़्यादा जाते हैं, why is this, right? और वो पहले कहते हैं कि शायद वो स्कूल के साथ कोई ताल्लुकात नहीं है, शायद ये है कि आप अगर बेटर स्कूल में जाएंगे, उनके दोस्त, उनके peers जिसे हम कहते हैं, they will also be better, right? So it's nothing to do with the school, it's just a question of who are the other children they're interacting with. So we have a way of looking at that. We have a way of looking at whether it was because they were of the peers. And we show that, no, this is something to do with the school, it's not to do with the peers. Right? So we get the same effect when we look at peers. The second reason people ask us is to say, this is nothing to do with a better school, this is just because more private schools are better, right? And you're really picking up the effect that the kids are going to a private school. That's also not the case. The children who go to a better government school get exactly the same higher education as children who go to the private school. Right? Lastly, they say, maybe if you went to a better school, it's that school also had higher grades and that's why you could go further. That's also not the case. Right? So it's really something about the school, not about the other children who are going there, not about the fact that it's private or public that matters. If you send your child to a better school, they will be more likely to go to college. Right? Next slide. Yeah. So then very interestingly we find that unki earnings are now higher. How much higher are they earning? Their earnings are higher by about 10% a month. Right? 10% a month, I want to give you a sense of what 10% a month means. 10% a month means कि हर महीने वो $14 यानी कि 2,000 रुपए एक्स्ट्रा वो अर्न कर रहे हैं. Right? यानी कि साल में वो 24,000 रुपए एक्स्ट्रा अर्न कर रहे हैं. Right? अगर साल में वो 24,000 एक्स्ट्रा अर्न कर रहे हैं, उनकी अर्निंग्स 40 साल के लिए तो होगी ना, वो तो काम करेंगे 40 साल के लिए. Right? So 24,000 times 40, roughly about a lakh. You're 10 lakhs. Right? So their earnings through their lifetime is going up almost by 10 lakhs. Just by going to a better school in the same village. अब आप सोचेंगे लास्ट स्लाइड, अगर मैं फिर आपसे ये पूछ सकता हूं कि देखें, एक स्कूल में एक ही तो बच्चा नहीं है, बहुत सारे बच्चे हैं, एंड इन द एवरेज स्कूल, अब स्कूल बहुत छोटे हो गए हैं, राइट? आई डोंट नो इफ यू नोटिस, बट स्कूल्स नाउ इन इंडिया, वेरी स्मॉल स्कूल्स, इन पाकिस्तान आर क्वाइट स्मॉल. There are about 74 children on average in a school. So what we show, you can ask, given these earning effects, how much should we be willing to spend to make a government school much better? Right? And the right answer is we should be willing to spend 3 crores every 5 years to make a school with just 74 children better. That number, as a person who has worked on this, we can justify that number just in terms of better earnings for the children. ये पैसे हमारे पास वापस आएंगे. Right? We can spend for a school of just 74 children in rural Pakistan. I'm not talking about Delhi, I'm not talking about Bangalore, I'm not talking about Hyderabad, I'm not talking about Mumbai, I'm talking about rural Punjab. I'm not talking about Punjab, India, जहाँ पर आधे लोग तो Canada में, right? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about rural Punjab, where when the migration happens, it happens to the Gulf countries. Right? We should be willing to spend I can justify spending 3 crores every 5 years. अब आप मुझे खुद बताएं, कोई भी सरकारी पॉलिसी है हमारे पास जो स्कूल को कहती है ये 3 करोड़ हर 5 साल आप ले लें अपने स्कूल को बेहतर करने के लिए. We don't think in those numbers, but those are the right numbers to think about. That's what I'm saying, कि हम सोचते हैं कि यार 30,000 रुपए मिल जाए, 50,000 मिल जाए, बहुत है. Right? That's the wrong dimension. That's why I'm saying we need to think about 100 times more. It's not about a doubling of the budget, 3 times the budget, it's 100 times the budget, and that we can still justify with the earnings increases. Right? So let me finish up with starting off the discussion. And so these are our results. And next slide. These are our results. And it's हमारे लिए ये results are important. They're important, but they're also puzzling. Right? And I want to start the discussion by asking and thinking about what is the puzzle here, right? तो ये I just picked this for Google Maps से मैंने वो एक तस्वीर बनाया था कि वो नियर बाय है ना, Google Maps पे नियर बाय नहीं है, वो आप कहीं भी जा सकते हैं, then you can say near by, and then you can say schools. तो ये मैंने बनाया था उसके, ये कहाँ पर है, जंगपुरा, यही जंगपुरा भोगल साइड, ये छोटे से ये 200 मीटर का डिस्टेंस है. ये 200 मीटर के डिस्टेंस में 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 schools. Right? 9 schools on Google Maps, which probably means there are 30 schools. No? Right? Now, here's what I'd really like your opinions and thoughts on. From everything we are seeing, there's going to be big differences across these 30 schools. Right? And parents have to choose which school to send their children to. These are not schools that are maxed out in terms of capacity. We are not talking about Sanskriti, where you have to go to the PM's office and get somebody to write you a letter and you know whatever, right? We are not talking about modern, we are not talking about Vasant Vihar, Vasant Valley, we are not talking about Shriram, right? We are not talking about that. We are talking about chote-mote schools, chote low-cost private schools, medium-cost schools, but there is massive differences in how they're educating their children. So, 2-3 questions to think about. How is it that we should make, and 2 points, जो schools better and the schools that are doing better, उनकी price point ज़्यादा, is higher, right? That also there's no doubt about, right? The price point is higher for the schools that are doing better. Now, my question to you is the following: is it the case? how are you seeing अपने schools में among your parents? How are you seeing this play out? Do you think that parents are making the right choices? Right? Why is it that we don't see parents spending the money to send their children to the best schools? Is it they don't have the money? Then on the other side, how are schools advertising? Right? Schools की तरफ से advertisements कैसे हो रही है that, how do I make sure that people know that my school is good? क्योंकि मैं खुद तो, what do we usually do? We say grade 10 exam topper, blah, 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 right? That's the only advertising we do. Right? Grade 12 topper, यहाँ से यहाँ हुआ है, यहाँ से हुआ. But उसके नीचे जब foundational learning पे आप आ जाते हैं, तो बुनियादी तौर से आप देखते हैं, how can we advertise? How do we do it? I don't know. फिर हम लिख देते हैं computer lab, blah, 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 but that's not advertising about how good we are at teaching the children. Right? So how do we attack that problem कि parents decide करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं? Parents बहुत concerned है कि किसी ना तरह से मेरे बच्चे को ये शिक्षा हासिल हो जाए. Right? ये मैं नहीं मानता कि parents को concern नहीं है. Right? So how do we make sure that parents know and realize what choices they are making? Right? Because I find it a big problem that as a private school, when I talk to the private school owners, they say for us, one of the biggest problem is 5th grade तक मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ? मैं इम्तिहान अपने ही सर लूँ, nobody will believe. अगर मैं खुद internal test करके कह रहा हूँ कि मेरे बच्चे बहुत अच्छे कर रहे हैं, nobody will believe it.
They're worried with that. Right?
Correct.
They can't even advise provided the marks.
Exactly. No, they can't. No, exactly. And even worse, that's where we are seeing the massive gains in earnings coming from. So I want to leave it there and kind of paint this picture, a full picture now of we are living now in a space and a time when there are lots and lots of choices. वो दिन चले गए when schools are scarce. Right? है, कहीं है, अगर आप राजस्थान में जाएंगे कहीं मैं बहुत घूम चुका हूँ, आप दफ्तर में जाएंगे, आप छिंदवाड़ा में जाएं, मध्य प्रदेश में कहीं हैं गांव जहाँ पर स्कूल बहुत मुश्किल में पहुँचना है. But ज़्यादातर हमारे populations के लिए now schools are not scarce. The problem is there are lots of schools. Right? What I'm giving you is just one fact. And the fact is, if children go to better schools, their wages, their earnings, their lives are a lot better. Yeah? And the two things I want you to take away from this fact is that those gains are very large. We can justify spending of 3 crores every 5 years to improve schools. Right? What I now need for you is a lot of thinking about what should we do in this environment. Maybe we shouldn't do anything that's different, I don't know. But what is it that we should do that's different in this environment from what we've been doing before, so that we can both help schools and help children and help parents make the right choices for themselves.
How about parent testimony?
So let me stop here and then pass it over to Rahul and others. You have been very patient with me. I thank you for listening to me all this time. And a special thanks to you for being the best reader ever. आप लोग बहुत patience और बहुत very nicely you listen to everything I have to say. So let me pass it over to Rahul and maybe we can.
Yeah, thanks all. So the format is ऐसा है कि now whoever wants the mic has something to, you might even have questions for Jishnu on the presentation. So maybe those of you who have questions can ask them first. But also Jishnu has opened up a couple of questions for this group, and there are educators, there are parents, there are some school children, but I think they need to go now, right? So we will also say, we also take this opportunity to say bye to the school kids, because I think they've had enough of this. That's a message that I was given on the side, that this is good. And so that's because they have also made their decision on when it's time to leave. But for the rest of us, because there are just like people wearing so many different hats in this room, we can open it up to
the discussion that sort of Jishnu has pointed us to. So I will pass this along. Is there one more mic? Just so we can circulate it.
Hi, this is a question for Jishnu.
After the autographs.
Although even history of food chala kya to way much very time to go difficult yaar
Actually. They're not only clear about eating when they're done, but they're getting everything out of it. This is lovely. It's sort of a high level of education. So Jishnu, there's a question for you.
Yeah, so Jishnu, you mentioned a bunch of different reasons why there could be a difference between the highest performing school and and you basically came to the conclusion that it's the school itself which is good. But I could be misunderstanding Karthik Muralidharan's study where in Andhra, where I believe he came up with the conclusion that actually the school does not matter if you adjust for the socioeconomic background of the student. As I understand, maybe I'm completely wrong. And so what I understood from that is that अगर आपका अमीर बच्चा सरकारी स्कूल में जाता है, which is poor performing, chances are they will do almost as well. There might be some aspect of the school that makes an adjustment, but basically because of the help and the extra resources from home and because of all of these other things, and those factors are actually more important. And similarly, if a poor child goes to a quote unquote high performing school, then the poor child will also only have a small difference. That's what I understood. Maybe I'm wrong. What would you say to that?
So what Abhijit does in his paper is he looks at the average difference between public and private schools. And he says there's a positive difference between public and private schools on average. But when you control for whether parents are rich or parents are poor, there's actually Andhra Pradesh one. Yep. So two things. So one is results can be different across different places, so no problem with that. But the second one, which I should point out, is that's the fundamental issue that we want to think about, right? Which is, are schools different because the children are different from different backgrounds, or is it something about the school, right? So we do this very complicated. So the first thing to think is, Abhijit is thinking about average public, average private. He's not talking about individual schools and saying, are individual schools different? So we do this very complicated thing called value-added modeling, right? I didn't believe it would be right. But then we did this test to see whether our ideas were correct, right? And the idea behind the test is the following. Yeah, the idea behind our test is the following. We are saying one school, we're saying one school is very good, right? And in that school, you can increase, that school increases test scores by 100, right? When we say another school is not that good, it's increasing test scores by 50, and another school is really not good, it's increasing test scores by 20. This is our complicated value-added modeling, right? And then we say, if we are right, when a new child comes into that school, I should be able to perfectly predict कि वो एक साल में how much will their test scores go up. If I'm right? So we show exactly that. We show that कोई अगर नया बच्चा आ रहा है उस स्कूल में, if he comes to a 100 school, his or her test scores will go up by 100. If he comes to a 20 school, his or her test scores go up by 20. So without knowing anything about the child, without knowing anything about the parents, we can predict perfectly how much they will gain just by looking at the quality of the school that they're going to. That for us was really important because, like you, I would have been skeptical beforehand, but these methods are working quite well now.
So, Jishnu, I have worked on multi-studies in Shahadra, and that was my fieldwork area. After highly inspired by James Tooley's work and all that, So, I wanted to check, and I'm coming from a very, very qualitative background, right? So, one thing is that you mentioned that parents are very, they understand and they put a lot of value on teachers, correct? Now, could you just elaborate a bit on that as to how they evaluate the teachers and the qualifications within the low-key private schools? I'm not talking about the government schools at all. From my experience in, say, the Khadar region in Delhi and Shahadra, parents, for instance, who are sending their kids to the LFPs, they have often mentioned discipline. आजकल सरकारी स्कूल में इनका ये मानना बंद हो गया है, सब बिल्कुल खराब हो गया है, and therefore you need to send them to private schools में discipline बहुत ज़्यादा है, सख्ती, हाँ, and of course the other issues of a proper uniform and stuff like that. That discipline aspect was very, very important. On the other hand, the schools themselves, and that they pay like, the corruption is massive there, right? In 2013, they were showing that they were paying 5,000 to the government, but they were actually paying around 2,500 like that. So how are we actually evaluating the good schools? And the aspect of teachers in your data, how did you evaluate that kind of aspect? Could you, and just one more thing related to that is that did you take into account this whole the corruption issue of the LFPs, especially with respect to the unrecognized and the recognized schools, because all of these schools in all these regions, they have this duality, right? The unrecognized and the recognized, and the unrecognized schools, they have an understanding with the recognized schools, and they pay an extra amount, and that falls to, that goes back to the parents, right? So how, this amount, this perception of value, can you just, elaborate on these aspects? Thanks.
So आप just to rephrase, from what I understand, दो सवाल हैं, right? One question you're asking is, in a study, how do we evaluate teachers in schools? And then the second question you're asking is, how do parents evaluate teachers, right? And I'll say a little bit, and then I'll ask people to contribute and think about it. In our study, we evaluate teachers by looking at how much their children gain in test scores. Okay? So we follow, for 4 years, we look at their children, we look at how much they gain in test scores. Seems to work fairly well. Parents' evaluation of teachers is really interesting. And the problem you're saying is even worse, because जब हम काम कर रहे थे, only about 25% of mothers have primary schooling, 75% had no schooling. So मैं उनसे पूछता था that how do you find out whether your teacher is good or not? One mother, and I won't say that this is a common story,
but I think people do come up with methods. One mother told me कि मैं बचपन के जो poems होते थे, right, वो मैं सुनाती हूँ अपने बच्चे को, right. I asked her to write it down, and then 2 days later I asked her to recite it back to me, right. So even those who actually had never gone to school, they were trying to come up with methods to try and figure out whether the teachers were good. But I feel, and Shahra is an area which has a lot of migrant populations coming in. So what 95% of Shahra is first generation migrants, right? So, so illiteracy is pretty high in Shahra. It's not a low, it's not so, I'm with you on all of that. But I ask people to contribute. I mean, some of you are teachers, some of you are school owners. What is your sense कि parents बता सकते हैं आपको कि teachers आपके school में अच्छे कौन हैं, कौन नहीं है, कौन अपने बच्चे के साथ are doing a good job, who are not? Any thoughts from?
पेरेंट्स तो टाइम टू टाइम बताते हैं और उसी वजह से हम लोग प्राइवेट स्कूल वाले इम्प्रूवमेंट भी करते रहते हैं. दूसरी बात मैं आपसे एक पूछना चाहता हूँ, इसको आप ये समझ लें कि ये आज के टॉपिक में नहीं है, लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से टॉपिक में ही है कि एक बात बताइए, जब प्राइवेट स्कूल इतना अच्छा करते हैं, बच्चों को इतनी अच्छी शिक्षा देते हैं, उनको डिसिप्लिन भी देते हैं, उनको संस्कार भी सिखाते हैं, उसके बावजूद गवर्नमेंट उनको अप्रिशिएट नहीं करती, उल्टा गवर्नमेंट उनके खिलाफ काम करती है. सेम आ गया आपका पब्लिक स्कूल और यू कैन से सरकारी स्कूल. उसमें ना तो पढ़ाई होती है, ना कोई डिसिप्लिन होता है, ना कोई संस्कार बच्चों को दिए जाते हैं, मतलब कुछ भी नहीं होता, फिर भी गवर्नमेंट उन्हीं के साथ खड़ी है.
ये पांडव कौरव बैटल में मैं तो नहीं फंसने वाला. नहीं, मैं हर स्कूल के खिलाफ बोलूंगा. अगर वो स्कूल खराब है तो स्कूल खराब है, स्कूल बेहतर है तो स्कूल बेहतर है. नहीं, बट सरकारी स्कूल भी तो आप अगर देखेंगे वो केंद्रीय विद्यालय है वर्किंग क्वाइट वेल, नवोदय है वर्किंग क्वाइट वेल. सो देयर आर सम गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स जो बहुत ही खराब एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं. There's some government schools that are giving good education.
या प्राइवेट स्कूल या प्राइवेट स्कूल इतना अच्छा कर रहे हैं, हर जगह पे अच्छा कर रहे हैं. In all fields, don't say about it.
No.
Yes, all
No, so
yes, all day.
no. Hold on.
Yes.
No, I totally agree. I mean, not all government schools are bad, not all private schools are good. So after on your how the elementary and the APA schools advertise or make the parents aware वो क्यों अच्छे हैं, right? That's the element of the rule. Or for the conscientious leaders, school leaders, and in our community, I mean, I run a part of an affordable private school. We're trying to figure out. अभी हम दिल्ली में बैठे हैं. We're still trying to figure out what we are good at, right? Because infra is, and I was like, I had a question then कि जिसने infrastructure अच्छा दे दिया, that particular school leader or school is not able to find good teachers is very highly unlikely. I mean, in urban setup. So हम लोग खुद अभी figure out कर रहे हैं, and for a school leader like me who's been there for the last 15 years, consciously and confidently advertise that we have kind of cracked this, we are really good at this. We are trying to still figure out, because the toughest part is the teaching learning process, right, and the learning outcomes. And हमारे for obvious reasons you would know, teachers, अच्छे teachers आके रुकना, ma'am also highlighted salary is one big point. That's very highly unlikely. So if we really excel on anything, do we go out and advertise, or do we let our work speak for years to come, and the parents themselves, their word of mouth से बोलते हैं. So the easy part to get is discipline है, there is rigor there, accountability here, as compared to most of the public schools. That one can easily agree. And the language, जितनी भी टूटी फूटी, I mean, English is So APS schools में teachers को English कैसी है? I mean, I run a school, so that's a huge. I mean, I'm honestly confessing that. But the fact is, हम लोग भी figure out कर रहे हैं. We just can't go out and say, okay, we are better than none. At least I don't do that. A lot of people do that on superficial things. Okay, the appearance, what is evitable. I mean, what's the optics part of it. We haven't got the right answer. I mean, I just want to highlight that. Yeah.
Let me put an option on the table, and then my habit is usually to make other people answer the questions that I can't. So let me put one option on the table, right?
imagine that a third party organization comes to you and says, will you be willing to let your children be tested? And I will create a third party certification कि आपकी school was level 5, level 4, level 3. Would you agree to that?
I would personally agree. वो effect होता है सीधा उस पे admissions के in following year because बड़ा क्यों school, it got the basics, right? During the main part with कुछ कमान मिले. That parents come to know. So parents में यहाँ पे हम लोग overestimate करें कि parents concerned तो है, but let's try to figure out. They clearly don't know अंदर class में क्या हो रहा है, बच्चा जा रहा आ रहा है, खुश है ठीक है, question हो रहा है तेरा.
Wait, एक second. So there are some people from Center for Civil Society here who have worked a lot on this kind of, and Hari, if you thought about public disclosure and everything, what's your sense of whether if you set up a third party certification, will private schools agree and pass it?
So, yeah, disclosing, I have a background of running private schools, right? So, but I don't run them anymore. I work with Central Square Foundation. And one of the things that, thanks to a lot of Jishnu's work, is the thing that we are tossing in the air is, what if, as Jishnu suggested, a neutral third party comes to a school, does a simple assessment, not rote learning textbook rule, Pythagoras theorem kind of question, right? Simple test which figures out where students' learning level is in relation to fairly basic standards, right? And instead of just handing over a student report card or a mark sheet like we always do, either we report results at a state level or a country level, or we report at a student level. We don't do anything in between. But the unit of change is neither the state nor the individual. The unit of change is the school. The school is the entity which makes this change. So what if we do a school report card, compare it to every other school that is around, and share it with all parents, right? So that the parents don't actually slap their kids around saying "tu duffer hai," but actually say, okay, my child's not doing well, but actually the school is doing terribly as well, and the school is placed at the bottom of, or the child's doing well, but the school's not doing. You could have various situations. The good thing is parents might go up and ask the school, "Kya ho raha hai? What's happening? What are you going to do to improve? Our school's not doing well. The neighboring school is doing well. So what's your plan of action?" Right? So the idea is that unless there is a demand for quality, only adjusting supply side may not help. We need to create a demand for good quality education and good quality outcomes.
You talked about going to better paying schools or more expensive schools, right? The problem is that more expensive school means better paying capacity from a peer group and parent group, right? Now, when you are choosing that, the intervention that is required today for every child in a school from the time they're 4 years old, all right, all the way till they're, I would say till almost the 10th, 11th, 12th, not even the formal tuitions of maths and science and all, but the basic day-to-day work that's being given to children to do, and the kind of intervention that we have to do as supporting them on a daily basis, that's going to make a huge difference to what the teacher's doing. So frankly, to my mind, and I support a bunch of kids, I'm involved in all their PTMs and everything. I don't even know the teachers' names, and I don't care to know them. Because the teacher only wants to know, is this child creating trouble? Is this child a neutral, stable child? They don't care about anything else in a class of 45 kids.
They don't. They know the child's name. They may say this one may have difficulty, but the question is, are you being able to support them? And if we are not able to support the children, so my point to you is, how are you factoring in? You have the school, you have the community, you have the fees, you have the test scores. But how much of the test scores are improving because of the parental support intervention, which today is significantly higher than it was even 20 years ago when my kids went to school much earlier. I've got 7 kids, from the 4-year-old that I'm having to teach to the kid in the 10th who started pre-boards. It's coming from parental or support intervention. It's not coming from the school. School's just about complete the syllabus and do nothing other than that. So how will you factor in that qualitative component of going into a higher paying private school, like you said, the fee is 1,000 rupees instead of 400. It also means that everybody who can pay 1,000 can pay to get a tutor or somebody who's going to support the child. How is that getting factored in is my simple question. Thanks.
I mean, at least in the statistical analysis, it's factored in, right? But yours is a very strong statement. I'll ask her, and then maybe you can respond, because madam ये कह रही कि आप schools कुछ भी नहीं करते. But it's a very serious issue, right? The serious issue is the parents are doing the work.
नहीं, मुझे बोलना है कि मुझे 2-3 चीज़ों पे बोलना है. मैं प्राइवेट स्कूल को रिप्रेजेंट करती हूँ. मैंने सारी जिंदगी प्राइवेट स्कूल में ही काम किया है. पर मैं ये और मुझे 2-3 चीज़ें बोलनी है. एक बोलना था आपको कि how do parents, when you asked a question, you asked a question, how do parents decide whether A school is better than B school for my child? I think parents are smart. If as a parent, I will decide a school which is caring for my child. I will not look at infrastructure. I will not look at anything else. If my teacher in my child's school cares genuinely for my child, then I will definitely choose that school over the other school. The second point I would like to make to your analysis, Jishnu, is where you said that you categorized a school as good, bad or ugly on the basis of the test score results. Now, that is taking a very myopic view of a school's success. To equate a successful school or a good school with test score results is looking at it with a very, very myopic lens. And I hope that research scholars like you and research institutes like Indus Central Square Foundation and Center for Civil Society looks at a wider lens, uses a wider lens to look at school success. Because the success of the school does not depend on, it should not be marked only by test results. The success is seen 20 years later about the kind of human being our children become. My third contention is to what the lady in front of me said, that in private schools, teachers are not concerned about their children. And I disagree also, because I represent a school that you spoke about thrice today, Vasant Valley School. So in Vasant Valley School, I think all our teachers care deeply for our children, and they are very, very concerned about if a parent was doing 90% of the work, then why should parents spend money to send their children to school? There is obviously something that they're gaining from their schooling experience. And the gains are not necessarily cannot always be quantified. The gains are also qualitative. And we do not look at those gains, kind of human beings we are getting, the kind of values that are being instilled, the kind of experiences that they go through. And that is what makes, as you mentioned in your presentation, a holistic education. We do not justify a student with nobody knows your scores, my scores. We look at the kind of person you are and the kind of person I am. And that is what many good schools will do. Thank you.
मैं एक चीज और कहना चाहता हूं, जैसे गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के अंदर प्राइवेट स्कूलों के एग्जाम सेंटर होते हैं 10th का 12th का, और प्राइवेट स्कूल वहां पर नंबर 1 अपनी पोजीशन लेके आते हैं, क्यों ना पब्लिक प्राइवेट स्कूलों में गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के एग्जाम सेंटर क्यों नहीं डालती गवर्नमेंट? क्योंकि अगर ऐसा कर दिया ना, 10% भी बच्चे पास नहीं होंगे. This is the situation. You all please mention it. You can understand about it. And madam is saying anything else. And madam is saying anything else. What? You should go for the point, or you should go for the reality. And reality I am telling you. आप ऐसा कर दीजिए ना, मैं सबसे रिक्वेस्ट कर रहा हूँ सबसे, आप ऐसा कर दीजिए, गवर्नमेंट स्कूलों के अंदर जब पब्लिक स्कूलों के प्राइवेट स्कूलों के एग्जाम सेंटर हो सकते हैं, हो रहे हैं, होते ही हैं, तो क्यों नहीं पब्लिक स्कूलों में गवर्नमेंट स्कूल के सेंटर बना दिए जाए। 10% अगर बच्चे पास हो जाए ना, तो मैं गारंटी देता हूँ, मेरे से जो मर्जी ले लेना, आई विल पे। हमारे यहाँ पर पब्लिक स्कूलों की मैं एक चीज और बता के बैठना चाहूंगा। हमारे यहाँ अशोक ठाकुर जी बैठे हैं, उनका स्कूल है मुनि इंटरनेशनल स्कूल। आज वो पूरे देश को गवर्न कर रहे हैं, पूरे देश में मॉडल स्कूल है उनका और प्राइवेट स्कूल है उनका, और आज वो ऑल ओवर वर्ल्ड में भी जाने के लिए जा भी चुके हैं, और उनको भी मॉडल बनने जा रहे हैं। तो क्या गवर्नमेंट स्कूल ऐसा कोई मॉडल है? राजी हो तो मॉडल बताइए।
I just wanted to go back to the previous, because I also run a affordable private school, and so I wanted to provide my experience in terms of what I've understood how parents evaluate the quality of a school. And you're right, I mean, many of the parents are first generation parents, but honestly speaking, I think for anyone, if it's first generation or if it's a wealthy parent, ultimately I think there is a combination of factors. Even a wealthy parent doesn't really know what's going on. Ultimately, a lot of it is just like, which is the school that basically other people of my kind end up sending their kid to. So if they send to a modern school, in fact, recently I was talking to somebody, and they were deciding between modern school and another school, which I knew was a good school. Said, yeah, वहाँ पर वो gentry ठीक नहीं आती. So that's unfortunately a very important aspect which we cannot ignore, which is people will sort of look at a good school and bad school based on class factors, which unfortunately is the truth. So I think people are not rational, whether they be quote unquote educated or less educated. They will look at these other factors as well. I think as far as poor parents are concerned, I'll give you an example of a father who was himself illiterate, but he was a vegetable vendor, and he was evaluating his son based on whether the son could read signs in English, right? And then he was making the son kind of write up bills and things like that, and then getting somebody else to check those bills, right? So that's one proxy that he was using. Other people end up using quote unquote more educated people. So for example, tuition teachers, and tuition teachers can be a proxy for sort of saying that, okay, you have looked at the children from different schools in the neighborhood, which is the school that you think is good or bad. Similarly, आस-पास के बच्चे बुलाते हैं, and then if there's a more educated sort of guest who comes, then they will basically use those. So it's actually, you're right, it's amazing how poor people, they are so concerned about their kids' school education. And certainly somebody mentioned that, I think that lady mentioned कि मेरा बच्चा ही मुझे बता देता है. If the child is coming back home and telling me very happily about my teacher and about the school, so that's a very important qualitative feeling in terms of if the child is happy or not. So I think it's a very complex bunch of things, but poor people, I think, are extremely concerned. They are paying out of their hard-earned money, or if they go to government school, still they're concerned about basically मेरे बच्चे को कुछ पढ़ने में आ जाए, कुछ बन जाए, right? That's it's a continuous thing that we hear about, right? And so it's quite remarkable how ingenious they are in terms of, but it's not just learning outcomes, which I think I will agree to. And it's a combination of factors. They're looking for also respect that they get. आपके स्कूल में आके ना मैं कुछ बोल सकती हूँ, बहुत सारे स्कूलों में ना, so those respect factors are also important, which sometimes I think, as the lady said, those are difficult to measure and sometimes not evaluated in the learning outcomes data, right? So those are some points.
The school value added modeling, I come from economics. The school value added modeling, you could do a similar kind of exercise to calculate teacher value added as well. Do you find that what you're classifying as good schools on the basis of school value added, does it correlate very much to the teacher value added of the teachers, and how mobile is the teacher labor market? How much would that matter? Also, the measure that you're using to calculate school value added, I presume you're using past cohorts from the same school and seeing the jump in their test scores from when they came to when they left. But of course, quality is a dynamic variable. It would change over time for the same school as well. And of course, these are network-driven things that are decided in equilibrium. So how would that matter for parents deciding today, not on the basis of past data? And just one personal anecdote, not related to the statistics. Even my parents, when I was in school, they were looking for measures to figure out what's a good school. And they would hang on to things like the Outlook survey of schools and these private surveys that rank schools on the basis of some vague measures that are not clearly defined. So maybe that does matter to parents. That's one proxy we're using. I think there is value to creating that data available for parents. As we know from some papers that have done the school report card sharing with parents, and then they seem to respond with changing the choice of school. So presumably there are welfare improving effects of giving that information to parents. But about teacher value added, how does that correlate to school value?
I'll take two questions purely because they're statistical in nature. So we actually do work on teacher value added, and basically a good school is a place that manages to get and keep good teachers. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line. The labor market is, so in these low-cost private schools, most of the teachers are girls from the village who have left secondary school, but abhi tak unki shaadi nahi hui. Right? That's the 6-year margin that they have for that. Then that was one question I wanted to take. The second question from here was very, very important. And then, ma'am, your question I'm going to pass on to Rahul because I think it's important we hear what he says. So, my friend Annie Jacob was at Vasant Valley, a very dear friend of mine. So, it's a school I hold a lot of respect for. Not as much as Springdale, Pusa Road, where we used to get into serious fights every day.
It's not representative of the points that I was.
No, but so the point that she was making, that a school is much more than just test scores, right? Let me fully agree with that. A school is about, Sanskriti, you show how, a different set of issues. And in fact, there's a very nice work done by this economist called Thirabo Jackson, who shows that we keep measuring test scores, but on these other behavioral measures, the long-term effects are much larger than on test scores, right? Absolutely. So we need to come up with better measures. I'm too old now to think of another 20 years where we come up with better measures and then follow children for the next 20 years. So I'm hoping that one of you will take that on. But let me make this point that doesn't invalidate our findings. So what we are trying to say, even if you only focus on test scores, forget the rest of the stuff. Right? Even if you only focus on test scores, the schools that are being able to improve test scores, their children have much better earnings later in life.
And test scores don't come for nothing.
And they don't come for nothing. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. We should start thinking of developing better measures overall. But as a start, the test scores are not a bad place where we at least now have that evidence we need to say that, look, this has real effects on their lives later on. And then one question, the last thing that I want to get some input from Rahul is, so it's not true that the government, interestingly, the government now does support private schools through its right to education, right? And that might have alleviated some of the financial concerns you were talking about. But I haven't studied the right to education, but I know Rahul and Tarun and Indus Action have been looking at it very carefully. So I'd ask him to actually tell us a little bit about what's happening with that and whether that's changing choices and what it is.
No, I mean, actually, that is quite contentious. The support that comes, as many people in this room know, is for the 25% kids who are in these seats is based on a per child cost calculation, which is often far too low compared to actually what it costs to educate a child. And further, there are lots of bureaucratic hassles. I think the state is very good at getting welfare to individuals because there is sort of claim-making demand, and there's a vote bank that is going to ask for those welfare entitlements, but it doesn't quite happen with organizations. And so there are people in this room who are running schools who have not received those reimbursements from the state. So I think the problem with kind of focusing on the RT as that sort of channel of greater funding is that there is a sort of complicated set of bureaucratic challenges, but also just the way that the per child cost is calculated is quite contentious.
Societal level, having 35% in a class, it makes a huge difference. And year after year, when we're seeing at the kids, they will have public calling for that. We're seeing them now, and the school recognizes them by the debt standard and so good into the scholarships. We continue to do well. And I'm finding that it's absolutely made a huge difference because within society itself, when you have a school, right, and you've got 25% per class, that's not a small number. And if you see it over 5 years and 7 years, it is making a difference to everybody if putting it up.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for that point because I think we get to focus on the finances. There's just one question here, Shiva. You got the mic, and then I'm going to just give this one.
So you showed us the data where like there were public schools and there were like private schools, and in terms of the performance. So on top of my mind, I'm just thinking that the ones who are in public bracket and performing well, and in fact you also said it, are like probably Navodayas and Kendriya Vidyalayas of India. But I think all of us are aware that these schools also come with a limited choice. Like there is a certain merit that you need to have to go to those schools. Now, when there is a choice, I mean, it's a limited choice. So of course, it's not like clear that they can like literally make anybody who's probably not able to afford a low-income private school or maybe a private school can go to those schools. So I just want to ask, in that data, was that a factor that you took, like, because it was a different set of population? So was it involved?
Just before that, just quickly, we have one more there, one more point there. Just wanted to say that this should be the last question. They're waiting for tea upstairs, and after this, and then because they're quite strict about, getting us out of here. So, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Okay, this is just on the RTE part as well. So I think I was going to put out, in terms of how you're doing these measurements, there's a very interesting potential data set, which is the RTF of 2009 came in. So you have a set of children that have gone through all these different private schools of different fee points as well over that period. And they are now at the board examination stage as well. Those children are the same because they've been selected by government, not by private schools, to go into those schools as well. So when you look at, can we identify a group that is not pre-selected economically by different schools, that is common across all schools, and then when you're looking at what is the value add happening, I think there's a really interesting data set in Delhi to say, truly, okay, does a higher fee school do more value addition than a lower fee school or not? And which ones do as well? And what does that plotted look like when you look at the type of school, the type of resources, and the type of outcomes you're getting out? And you just take those RTE children over the last 15 years, you can map them all out now, right? I think it's a really interesting data set.
So you're completely right. Huh? And, if the public schools are selecting on how good the kids are, I'm working in villages where there aren't these kinds of schools. These are the standard gaon ke public school, and there's no restriction on where you can go. आप किसी भी school पे जा सकते. So you're totally right. If there were restrictions, if there were entry barriers, it would make our life harder. In this case, it doesn't. We are not working in that sample. And if we were, we would have to work very hard to try and see whether what we are saying can be done for the Kendriya Vidyalayas and the Navodayas. We're totally
just to sort of maybe also the pitch for what we are working on with Jishnu now, and to answer your question on the RTE. We are, given what Jishnu has worked on, in the process of trying to get permissions to get information on the RTE students in Delhi. Once we do that, we're trying to see basically start with students who are in class 8, and we can track them over the next few years to create a similar kind of data set. And you're right, the opportunity for a counterfactual is very strong because there's a lottery system in which there are children who do not get into the RTE, and we want to see what choices they have made. Right now, we are still in the process of trying to get that data, because while the government has data on the students who did get admitted, they haven't always kept the data on the students that did not get admitted. So we are in the process of talking to the Delhi government to set up a longitudinal study on this. Immediately in the next 2-3 years, we should be able to tell you what happens right after class 8, because that's the cutoff for the RT, and entering into college. And then hopefully, if we track them long enough, we can say more about labor market outcomes. So it's so far just been a sort of process of trying to get permission from the government to access data, but hopefully that happens soon. But Jishnu is helping us and advising us on making that work. So very interested in actually doing the same. Then it answers different set of questions. One is, what is the sort of relative benefit of the RT itself, and also we can do comparisons between the public and the private. So that'll be really exciting. I want to thank everyone for your very enthusiastic participation, and for staying this late. I know it's post work. So we have some refreshments upstairs, and that you can help yourself to. Besides that, I mean, just thanks to everyone who helped organize this, and our partners in this who reached out to a lot of people to bring them in, also helped us design the poster, and of course, Jishnu, thanks for coming in. Besides all that you're doing with helping us trying to structure the study, I think doing this kind of public conversation on the value of good schools is really important. I think we've had, like all of you agree, years and years of discussion within the policy space, but frankly, a big part of this comes from whether we as parents or other concerned citizens actually demand better value from our schools. So thank you so much for getting us started on this conversation.